Welcome back to class, everybody. So, today's warm up is interpret. If you remember, that's the third part of a critique. That was after description. So, in our imagination, we have to have already described this, analyzed it, talked about how the person organized their colors and where they put things in the page and how they use things like pattern and size and all that sort of thing. Now we're talking about the emotion, the feeling of it. There's a lot of really expressive lines in this and powerful colors and things like that. There's a really unique imagery to this work. It's by Jean-Michel Basquiat. You'll see his name right after I get rid of my head here. So I want you to, not knowing much about him or his past, even if you do know about him, I'm not going to say exactly what this painting's about. I just want you, based on the kind of lines and imagery he's throwing at you, how does this feel? How do you think he felt? How do you think he wants you to feel? That's what you need to do. All right, back in a minute. All right. So, moving on. Hopefully, you've got that down in your sketchbook. Got like 3 or 4 sentences just saying your basic impression of it. That's kind of all you can do in interpret, especially when your teacher is not telling you much about the painting itself. You just have to go with your instinct. And that's a lot of what art criticism is. What do you instinctually feel about this piece? That's what we want to know. All right. So yesterday we started marking out the parts of a shadow. You finished your 7-step value scale. Today we're actually going to create the shadows that go on that ball. So yesterday we named them, but today we're actually going to make them. All right. Okay, guys. So right here is a pretty good diagram of what we were talking about yesterday. You can see the highlights marked. In the middle, they have what's called transitional light, or the middle values. I call them midtones. Some people call them middle gray. Some people mark that hard line for the terminator. There's a lot of debate in that spot. But basically what you need to know is it goes from the highlight and it slowly grades down to the core of the shadow. You can see there's a little bit of reflected light there just on the edge of it. Reflected light is a very small, very insignificant part, but it makes a big difference even though it is so small. And then below that, we have the cast shadow. Even they have the value scale next to it. Their value scale is 10, and most are 9. You want kind of an odd number so you have an exact middle gray, but we're only doing 7. It's the same idea throughout. It's just how much can you delineate between each of those shadows. But let's see a little bit more of why some things in drawing shadows are important here. First, the direction of your light source. You can see how it's coming down from that angle and it's hitting the edges of that apple. The spots where it's hitting the edge, that's the terminator on it. Even though it's not a sphere, it has a slightly different shape. All those parts, all those qualities we were talking about are still on there. You just have to fit them to the new shape. They have to bend with it 3-dimensionally. But this is a good job of just illustrating the idea of light source. The next one is on that same subject. You can see here, the light source is always coming from one direction. Whether you're observing or you're making it up in your mind, the light source has to be consistent, especially when you start putting more objects in your drawing like this. If you have the shadow going the wrong direction on one thing, it breaks the illusion, and all of a sudden the entire thing falls apart. You'd be amazed how fast people's brains recognize an incorrect shadow. They might even know exactly why. There's something off about this, something doesn't feel right, because you have like the tree shadow going the wrong way from the person shadow. Here's a really good example of taking these parts of the shadow and wrapping them around a different object. Look at these lips, look at that bottom lip especially. You have a really dark shadow in the middle. That's the cast shadow from the top lip. Then right below that, you have the highlight. That really bright spot where there's a lot of light, that's your highlight. Then below that, it starts to get a little bit lighter. You can see about where it starts turning underneath down there. There's this nice line in there. It's not a harsh line. It's not like they drew a line there. You can just tell they started making it a little bit darker after that. That is the terminator. That's the middle gray right there. And then it starts getting into the shadows right below that. And then if you look at the very bottom of the lip there, see just the slightest bit of reflected light. That's the light reflecting off the chin and coming back up. And then underneath that is the darkest shadow, and that's its cast shadow. Same ones. It's just matching to a different shape. And we'll see how that changes with things that are a little more geometric and stuff like that as we go. But this is the idea. Remember those parts of the shadow, things like the core shadow, the highlight, the cast shadow, and you always want to make sure that your drawing has those, unless you're getting rid of them for a reason. That's going to be my mantra through this whole class. You can do whatever you want in art. You just have to be doing it for a reason. You have to know why you're doing it. If you're saying, Mr. Reimer, I'm not doing shadows on this, I'm going to ask you why, and I'm going to want an answer. All right, so now let's go to the board and see what we're going to be working on. Okay, so what we were working on yesterday is you did the value scale. Hold on one sec. Our background's going crazy. We did a value scale, and then we did the parts of the shadow labeled out in a diagram. Today is called the actual render. It's not like a technical term or anything, but we're rendering the actual drawing. What I want you to do is draw out the same size box as you did for the value scale. If you're using the same piece of paper, you can actually just do it on the back side and match the square from the other one. But this one, I want you to do what's called a gradient scale. It's a little bit different. The idea with this one is to not have those clean 7 steps. This one, you want it to be an even gradient all the way across. see if you can make it just as clean as the other one. And you can flip back and forth as a reference to see about how dark middle gray should be. You don't want it to be a step as much. You want to blend it out there. And you can do that with the edge of your pencil or blending it with your thumb or whatever you want to do. I'm using charcoal because it lays down a little bit easier. But I just want to go back and forth. Remember, with drawing materials like pencils and charcoal, you can always make it darker. So you can come back here and push it darker. But once you've got this in too dark, it's a lot harder to push it back the other way. So slowly build it up, get a nice gradient in there. Once you got that done, then we're going to move down to the circle. You want to follow the shape of the object. So it's a curved line. I'm not using straight lines straight across because it's not a straight, flat object. It's not a record. It's not a plate. It's a ball. So we want to go around it. And same as the value scale up there. You just want to blend it in. So I've got my core shadow, I've got my midtones, and the highlight's going to be right up there. I could probably push the midtones a little bit more so that highlight's a little cleaner. And then I'll push my core shadow a little bit more just to get it nice and even. And take your time with this, guys. There's no rush. I would rather you got it right than got it done fast. Because it's an important skill for the rest of the semester. Now, we can tell by where the highlight is right here that the light's coming from right there and coming down. Because that's kind of where our terminator is right there. So my cast shadow is going to be right about there. Like I said, that's the darkest spot right there. And then you can go back in with the eraser and give yourself a little bit of reflected light. And that's it. That's a shaded sphere. Obviously, I could spend a lot more time on this and get it a lot more perfect, but that's the idea. And then you want to go back to that diagram we did yesterday, and you want to make sure those parts are there. Like, do I have a highlight? Do I have my middle grays? Is the core shadow almost super dark? This one down here, it's not a term I'm going to make you learn, but it's called the occlusion shadow. That's your darkest spot. You got your cast shadow. You got reflected light. Check, 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 check. Good. And then upload it to Canvas so Mr. Reimer can see it. And that's it, guys. So go ahead and work on this. Take your time. Get it right. And I will see you tomorrow.